The Rosemont Public Library smelled of lemon oil, old paper, and the faintest trace of rain that never seemed to leave the town's air. Clara Wu noticed every scent before anyone else, the way dogs sense thunder. She knew the library's drafts, the squeak each shelf made when books were slid free, and the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights that other people swore were silent. She also knew how to fade into the margins. Most days, Clara spent the early hours alone, sipping jasmine tea while rotating the daily recommendation display. She avoided the reference desk as long as possible, not out of laziness, but out of fear. Conversations snuck up on her, pounced, left claw marks. Questions about printer jams or interlibrary loans sent her pulse jackhammering. In the 2 years since she had received her master's in library science and retreated to sleepy Rosemont, she had mastered the art of nodding, smiling, verbally responding as briefly as etiquette would allow, and then slipping behind the stacks before anyone could think of a follow-up question. On a wet Tuesday in October, the courier delivered a battered donation box sealed with once pink tape that had faded to the color of uncooked shrimp. Clara logged it, carted it to the basement storage room, and forgot it for 6 days. When she finally opened the box because head librarian Mason reminded her nothing could be shelved until it was processed, she found tatty romance paperbacks, a broken Polaroid camera, and at the bottom, an origami crane covered in dust the color of cigar ash. The crane was beautifully but oddly folded, thinner at the neck, thicker at the wings, with tiny, almost imperceptible notches along the edges, while on pink cyano color, Clara blew a gentle puff over it, dust eddied like smoke. A faint shimmer, less than moonlight on glass, rippled across the paper's surface. She told herself it was lingering static from the plastic bag inside the box. Because she was conscientious, Clara set the crane on her desk upstairs, intending to catalog it later, maybe frame it in the local artifacts cabinet. But for 3 days, every time she looked at it, she found herself distracted by an itch to investigate further. Origami cranes, she knew, traditionally contained wishes. She wondered if someone had hidden a message inside. On Friday, a lull stretched between the morning story hour and the afternoon homework crowd. Curiosity overcame timidity. She locked the door to the small office, washed her hands, and, heart-fluttering, began to unfold the crane. The first crease peeled back with a sound like a sigh. The second fold came undone in a slow quiver, sprinkling another puff of dust. By the fifth fold, the sheet lay open, a single square of parchment so thin it looked like pressed mist. Ink threaded across it in lines she knew had not been there moments ago. Words bloomed, black at first, then shifting to deep violet. Clara's breath snagged as she read. Once there was a widow who had forgotten how to speak her husband's name without breaking. One night, she found a river that sang his laughter back to her, until grief no longer tasted of iron. The letters faded, but the story remained, imprinted in her mind like a watermark. A brittle shiver ran up her spine. The room felt warmer, the lights brighter. Clara carefully refolded the crane, following the memory of its original creases. It settled in her palm, delicate and inert, as though nothing had happened. She decided private astonishment was safer than explanation. She placed the crane atop a stack of unsorted pamphlets, drew a steadying breath, and returned to the circulation desk. That afternoon, Mr. Javier Alvarez shuffled in for his usual newspaper ritual. A retired mechanic, he grumbled at the front page, circled job listings he would never apply for, and always left without checking out a single thing. He was gray, from hair to cardigan to watery eyes, and so bent under his own gravity, Clara sometimes feared he would simply fold in on himself. He paused by the pamphlet cart where Clara had absent-mindedly set the crane. His hand hovered over it. Clara opened her mouth to warn him it wasn't for patrons, but no words emerged. Mr. Alvarez picked up the crane. His thumb brushed one wing, light, thin, and pearly, seeped through the library like dawn, poured into a dim room. The crane unfurled by itself, parchment unfolding, tilting, angling in impossible origami choreography. When the final flap flattened, the parchment hovered at eye level in front of Mr. Alvarez. Words scrolled across it in that violet ink. Clara heard them more than read them. A man once built engines so his wife could ride with him to the end of every horizon. When she was gone, he forgot roads existed. One autumn, he heard her favorite song in the cough of an old truck's ignition and remembered the map was not finished. Mr. Alvarez swayed. The color that sorrow had stolen from his cheeks 10 years earlier returned, faint but sure. His lips trembled, not with tears, but with marvel. Then the parchment folded itself back into a crane and landed softly in his palms. He looked at Clara, as though noticing her for the first time in 2 years of visits. Thank you. She wanted to say, it wasn't me. Also, are you all right? And did you see that light? But the sentences tangled in her throat. She only nodded. Mr. Alvarez walked out, taller than he had entered, as if some invisible weight had lifted off his shoulders. The next morning, Saturday, the crane sat quietly beside Clara's mug. Outside, drizzle stippled the windows, but pedestrians arrived early, more than usual. A bedraggled teenager whose brother had died last month, a middle-aged woman who had miscarried twice in a year, a veteran who spent most days on the park bench across from the courthouse. They drifted toward the crane with an instinct animals have for storm shelters. Each time, it unfolded in midair. Each time, a story appeared tailored so precisely to their heart's fractures that Clara, eavesdropping from behind the reference shelf, felt like an intruder. And each time, the listeners departed lighter, eyes unclouded. Word spread without help from social media. Rosemont was small, wonder traveled faster than Wi-Fi. By the next week, a queue formed outside the oak doors before opening. Clara's pulse thudded so loud she feared patrons could hear it over the radiator. She stationed the crane on a pedestal, actually an upturned milk crate draped with a velvet book display cloth, and pretended to take notes on crowd flow for Mr. Mason, though Mr. Mason seemed largely oblivious. He was at a statewide librarians conference that week. She soon realized the crane no longer waited for patrons to touch it. It sensed need. As each person approached, it rose, unfolded, and told its shimmering story in words Clara heard inside her skin rather than through her ears. Sometimes it projected scenes on the dust motes, like tiny theater curtains. A child teaching her father to braid hair, a fisherman releasing the catch that reminded him of his late son, a pianist translating her stutter into music, sobs mixed with laughter. The hush afterward felt holy. Between visitors, the crane perched, almost alert. Clara tiptoed near. Thank you, she whispered one afternoon, surprising herself. The crane gave no sign of hearing, yet when she stepped away, she noticed an extra fold near its tail as though it had replenished itself. By month's end, the library circulation increased 47%. People borrowed armfuls after hearing their personal tales, some seeking the narrator's voice again in novels, others wanting to write down what they had witnessed. Clara registered new library cards, conducted orientation tours, recommended titles. She spoke out loud, entire paragraphs. The terror remained but softened, diluted by a sense of purpose. The crane had made her caretaker of something luminous. Then, head librarian Mason came back. He was a man who triple-checked budgets and treated overdue fines as moral failings. The second day after his return, he spotted the crowd snaking around the reading room. Is this some unscheduled program? He asked Clara. His tone implied unscheduled equaled unauthorized and unauthorized equaled apocalypse. Clara cleared her throat. It's, an interactive art piece that offers narrative therapy. The phrase spilled out unplanned, but sounded official enough. Patrons find it beneficial? Mr. Mason pinched the bridge of his nose. Therapy requires certification. It's more like story time for grown-ups. She forced a smile. No guidelines prohibit that. Perhaps. His gaze slid to the crane. But I need documentation. Don't let things get out of hand. Clara nodded vigorously, hoping the motion would bounce fear right out of her skull. That night, when the library was empty and the wind slapped bare branches against the windows, Clara carried the crane to the history alcove where no security cameras reached. She unfolded it herself, needing counsel. Ink flared. A caretaker once tried to lock magic in a cellar so neighbors wouldn't fear it. In darkness, the magic became starlight, then burst through the ceiling and showed everyone the night sky they'd forgotten. The caretaker realized safety had never lived in cages. Clara's shoulders relaxed. She whispered, "So I keep going." The violet words faded like fireflies. Crowds multiplied. Buses from adjacent counties clogged Rosemont's narrow streets. Mason muttered about fire codes. He requested an immediate board meeting. On the first Friday of December, Clara counted 53 people waiting at dawn. She opened early. The crane unfolded for the first visitor, a mother whose adult son refused to speak to her, and for each one afterward. Clara saw how their faces altered, sorrow lines smoothing, eyes recalibrating to some internal compass. The crane had never malfunctioned, never repeated a tale, never missed the mark. Yet beneath the marvel, Clara felt counting breaths, like a child tallying candies, sure the last piece loomed. That afternoon, while teenagers restocked the free books cart, she carried the crane to her office and slowly opened it. Only 9 folds remained. The thought struck as ludicrous, but she felt it. Each time it healed someone, a fold disappeared. At 0, what would happen? Would the crane become a limp square of blank paper? Would the stories cease? She told herself solutions might emerge, refolding perhaps, or asking it aloud, but she could not ignore the fact that the library would close for the holidays in 2 weeks. Between now and then, the line would surely drain the crane's remaining folds. That evening, after the last patron left, a young man who had survived an overdose in September, the crane's paper looked thinner, almost translucent. Clara locked the doors, unplugged the lobby lights, and sat on the floor, crane in her lap. "What happens when you're finished?" she asked. Her voice echoed in the stacks. A long moment stretched, empty. She began to refold the crane, trying to memorize each crease as before. Her fingers shook, not from fear this time, but from greed. She wanted one of those stories, her story, the one lodged inside her since age 13, when her parents' minivan had slipped on black ice, leaving her alone but alive. She wanted the crane to fold open and sing her name, to coax out the survivor's guilt that still prevented her from getting behind the wheel of a car or writing the novel her mother said she was born to write. She refolded the last crease, set the crane on the desk, and went home feeling failure's chill. Saturday was chaos. A blogger posted a glowing manifesto about the Miracle Library, and vehicles lined Main Street. Mason called for police to manage the crowd. As Clara guided people in batches, she watched the crane discharge fold after fold. 6 left. 5. 4. At 3 folds, Mason cornered her. "This cannot continue, Clara. The board is worried about liability. Some of these people are emotionally unstable. They leave better than they arrive," she said. It surprised her how steady her voice sounded. "That's anecdotal. And look," he pointed to the crane, now pale as onion skin. "Whatever trick this is, it's falling apart. Not a trick." He exhaled sharply. "The board meets Monday. They will likely suspend this exhibition." A fist of panic squeezed her lungs. That night, Clara didn't wait for closing. She took the crane to archives, a vaulted room few staff visited. Between rows of metal cabinets, she unfolded it. Only 3 folds remained. She stroked the top corner like one might pet a bird's head. "Could you tell my story?" she asked, barely audible, "just once, for me." The paper quivered, then the crane reassembled itself, lines crisp, folds sharp. A swirl of ink surfaced. "You who keep others from shattering, why fear your own breakage? The river that took your parents never stopped carrying their love downstream. Step in, it will lift you." The story was only that single luminous sentence, yet within Clara, a dam burst. Tears she had rationed for 15 years flooded out, not hot, guilty tears, cool, cleansing ones. When they subsided, she found herself kneeling, palms open, the crane perched there. The room smelled faintly of jasmine. 2 folds remained. Clara sensed the crane expected her decision. She could store it, protect the last stories for herself, little safeguard against Mason's shutdown. Or she could trust the magic to do what it had always done, give itself away. She rose, squared her shoulders, and carried the crane back to the lobby. Sunday, the library closed, according to schedule, but Monday morning, the crowd returned despite the board meeting. Mason's voice boomed from the conference room. Unsustainable, potential lawsuits, fiscal responsibility. Clara stepped through the doorway, holding the crane. The board members glanced up, startled. She was not scheduled to present. Her knees quivered, but held. "Before you decide," she said, "please listen." Ignoring Mason's panicked hiss, she placed the crane at the center of the oak table. It unfolded, hovered, and this time projected not just words, but golden silhouettes onto the paneled walls. Dozens of Rosemont residents, their faces before and after. The grief-stubbled widow, the teenage addict, Mr. Alvarez, now volunteering at the community garage. The vet teaching chess to 4th graders. Then the crane told one collective story. In a town tangled with sorrow, a library grew roots of light. Each person watered the roots with tears, and branches of laughter sprouted until the skies changed color and the river carried songs instead of regrets. Silence thickened like honey. Several board members wiped eyes, embarrassed but moved. Mason opened his mouth, then closed it. The crane folded itself again and settled on the table. Only one fold remained. Clara inhaled. It has one more story to give. After that, I don't know what will happen, but consider what one story has already done for each of us. No one spoke for nearly a minute. Then Miss Henrietta Lowe, whose late niece had been Clara's best friend, spoke. I move that we allow the crane to continue until its natural conclusion. The motion carried unanimously. Mason managed a tight nod. Policy bowed to wonder. As meeting adjourned, a small hand tugged Clara's sleeve. A girl of perhaps 7 stood there, clutching a frayed backpack. Her father waited by the door, eyes hollow. Clara recognized him as the man who lost his job at the mill's recent shutdown. The girl said, "My dad wants to smile again." Clara led them to the velvet-draped crate. The crane, resting like a white flame, rose slowly. With a soft rustle, it opened its last fold. Light poured brighter than ever, bleaching the morning rays that slanted through high windows. Words blossomed across the parchment, but these did not fade. They etched themselves into memory of all who witnessed. Even Mason, pacing by the copier, paused and stared. A father once lost his way in a forest of empty paychecks. His daughter painted lanterns from her laughter and hung them on every branch until, looking up, he could see the path home. The father's shoulders shook. The daughter's tiny, indrawn gasp sounded like a match struck in darkness. He knelt, hugged her fiercely, and though his eyes were wet, his smile arrived, tentative, tremulous, but whole. The parchment drifted down. No crane reformed. It lay flat, blank, except for faint seam lines. Clara lifted it, heart thudding, and realized she no longer felt afraid of what came next. She remembered every crease, every angle. She began folding. The paper, though thin, held firm, as though strengthened by the stories it had carried. Wing by wing, head by tail, she recreated the shape. When she finished, the crane looked exactly as it had the day it emerged from the donation box, except around its wingtips. Fresh creases, weighted, unpressed. Spaces for new stories. Clara set the crane back on its pedestal. She turned to the watching patrons. Would anyone like to learn origami? She asked. Her voice was steady, even warm. Many hands rose. That evening, Rosamond's sky blushed violet. In houses and diners and the quiet hospital room on 5th Street, people folded paper, new cranes, boats, foxes, each symbol restless with possibility. Stories, once caged by sorrow, stretched their wings. And in the library, Clara stood at the reference desk, ready to speak, to listen, to unfold the next chapter in whichever shape it chose to arrive.